There's a question I've been asked 100 times since the Pruitt case closed, and it usually comes from someone who heard only the version where the old rancher turned on his kids, wouldn't sell, cost them everything, the kind of story you retell with a head shake, the kind you frame as stubbornness that looks like villainy from far enough away. The question is, why wouldn't he just sell? But that's the wrong question. That's the question you ask when you think this story is about a piece of land. The real question is, what do you hold on to when the person who made a place sacred is gone? And the answer, Harlan's answer, cost him his son, almost cost him the ranch, and left a scar in the family that I'm not sure healed cleanly by the time I drove away for the last time. I'm a mediator. My job is to build bridges. Sometimes the most honest thing I can tell you is, I got to that bridge too late, and, by the time I arrived, one side had already burned it and called it an act of love. What I'm about to tell you is not a story about stubbornness. It's a story about grief that forgot to announce itself. About a man who turned against his family not because he stopped loving them, but because loving them and saving what was left of his wife had become two different religions, and he had not yet found a way to worship at both altars. I should have seen it sooner. I didn't. Here's what happened. Part 1. What the land remembers. I got to the Pruitt property 40 minutes early because that's what I do when I'm nervous, and I was nervous, which I logged in my field journal, a spiral-bound 70-page notebook I've carried everywhere since my first week on the job, 6 years ago, when my supervisor told me that mediation is just documentation with feelings, and I decided the best way to manage the feelings was to give them somewhere to go that wasn't the deposition room. The journal entry for that morning read, nervous. Arrived early. Drew a bluebell. The bluebell looked like a sock. It always looks like a sock. I've never once successfully drawn a bluebell, and I've been trying since I was 9 years old, which tells you something about persistence, I suppose, or possibly just about the kind of optimism that refuses to learn from evidence. The gate was unlocked. I noted this first observation about Harlan Pruitt before I laid eyes on him. Gate unlocked at 6:47 a.m. Later I would understand this was not carelessness. The gate was unlocked because the land did not require defense. Defending it was a presumed obligation, his family's, his neighbors, the county's, the shared and unspoken assumption of anyone who understood what this land was. That was Harlan Pruitt's theory of ownership, not that he owned it, exactly, but that he was responsible for it, and there is a significant difference between those two things that I didn't fully understand until much later, after a lot of it was behind me and some of it couldn't be undone. I parked my county truck on the Caliche Road and left the engine running for a moment with my coffee going cold in the cup holder. The light that morning was doing something I've never adequately described in any of my field notes, which is unusual, because I describe things for a living. Not dramatically, not the way writers describe light, but practically, the way someone describes a condition they need to account for. This light didn't accommodate that. It came in from the east flat and horizontal, the way light comes before it has fully decided to be day, moving low across the hill country grass in a way that made everything it touched look like it was in the middle of a held breath. 342 acres of live oak and cedar and coastal Bermuda gone yellow in the autumn dry. A stock tank at the base of the north pasture, dark and flat as pewter. Cattle in the middle distance, small from here, spread through the brush in the quiet way that cattle occupy space when nobody has asked anything of them yet. The main house sat on a limestone rise, white stone walls, a corrugated tin roof oxidized to the color of a bruise, from which, I would later confirm, you could see the entire lower property, both pastures, the fence lines, the cedar breaks, and, at the far southern perimeter, a row of cedar elms that would eventually become the whole of the argument. I wrote, beautiful. Don't say that out loud. This was a professional reminder, not a personal one. Saying beautiful things are beautiful to the people fighting over them doesn't help. It reminds them of what they're about to lose. It reminds them of what they're doing to each other. Accurate and useless in the same breath. I got out of the truck. The Pruitt land dispute had arrived on my desk 3 weeks prior in a manila folder that was already 2 inches thick before I opened the clasp, which is always a signal. Thin files mean two people who still talk to each other, one underlying misunderstanding, one afternoon, one pot of wheat coffee, moderate resolution. Thick files mean something has already hardened into position. Mediation on a thick file is not mediation in the ordinary sense, it is more like being a structural engineer called to look at a crack in a wall and deciding whether it's cosmetic or load-bearing. The Pruitt file was load-bearing. I knew the shape of it from my reading. Dallas Pruitt, 40 years old, eldest child, had made contact with Sunstate Holdings, a development company whose logo featured a stylized sunrise and whose legal team featured a stylized version of aggressive that would have impressed me if I weren't on the other side of it regarding the potential purchase of 400 acres of the ranch's southern pasture and Eastern Creek corridor. The offer they'd extended was, by any metric I'm qualified to apply, extraordinary. $2.1 million for land that was currently running no cattle and generating no meaningful agricultural income. Dallas had a wife. 2 daughters at a state university that charged out-of-state tuition even though they'd grown up an hour from the campus, which is a thing I wrote down as, that seems unfair but I don't make the rules. He had a feed supply store in Kerrville, Pruitt Ranch Supply, opened in 2017 with the inherited optimism of a man who had grown up in the industry and believed that was sufficient preparation for running a business during an increasingly difficult decade. It was not sufficient preparation. The store had been losing money quietly and consistently since 2019, the way a body loses blood from a small cut, not dramatically, just steadily, adding up to something serious if you didn't address it. Dallas had not addressed it. The ranch had. What Dallas had done, the first detonation in his series of detonations, was approach Sunstate without telling his father first. He'd gotten the offer. Had his own attorney review it. Worked up a presentation. Planned to walk into a family meeting with the full package assembled and say, look, here's the solution, here's the number, this saves the store and sets us up for 20 years. He never got to give the presentation. His uncle Earl found out. How Earl found out was not entirely clear from the file, though 3 competing accounts existed, and what was consistent across all 3 was that Earl told Harlan in the manner of someone delivering a verdict rather than news, not your son is considering an option you might want to discuss, but something more like, your son is selling your wife's land out from under you. That was the second detonation. Everything after that was in the file. The locked gate. A sheriff's incident report. Harlan refusing to return Dallas's calls for 11 days. Nora's carefully worded mediation request, and, at the back of it, the handwritten note on plain notebook paper, he's going to lose his mind if this goes to a judge. Please help. I'd read that note 5 times. The 5th time I read it I drew a small portrait of myself in the margin, frowning at a building, which is something I do when I'm emotionally implicated in something I'm professionally obligated not to be emotionally implicated in. He came out of the barn before I reached the front of the house. I was walking up the Caliche Road with my notebook tucked under my arm and my county ID clipped to my jacket like it meant something here, and he stepped out of the barn door into the early light and stopped. He had a halter in one hand, coiled. His other hand was empty and hanging at his side in the way hands hang when a person has been doing physical work for hours and briefly stopped. Harlan Pruitt was, and I wrote this down later, the same day, because I needed to capture it before it became a type, the kind of man who looked like the landscape had specifically made him rather than the reverse. Not tall. Broad in the shoulders in the way that comes from decades of actual labor, not the performative broadness of someone who pays to lift things in a climate-controlled room. His face had been weathered in the unglamorous way, not distinguished, not architectural, just the face of someone who had stood in Texas sunlight for 47 consecutive summers with his jaw set and come to a mutual understanding with it. Gray work shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Hat broken in over approximately 2 decades. Boots that were past the point of being boots, they were simply his feet, but with more authority. He looked at me the way ranchers look at county officials, somewhere between resignation and mild contempt, the look of a man who has been visited by people carrying clipboards for 40 years and has formed an accurate picture of what clipboards produce. "You're early," he said. "Yes, sir." "Hearing's at 9. "Yes, sir." He considered this, the earliness, the audacity of it, then turned back toward the barn. "Coffee's in the house." Nora left the door open. That was our first conversation. I wrote it down word for word. The inside of the house was not what I'd assembled in my head during 3 weeks of file reading, which I'll admit because I do this. I assembled a mental image of the home of a 70-year-old widower who ran cattle alone and had not spoken to his son in 3 months. I expected the particular kind of desolation that settles into a house when its main caretaker is gone: faded surfaces, the drawer left slightly open, the kitchen organized to functional minimum. What I found was fullness, not clutter. These are not the same thing. The house was full in the way that homes are full when someone has spent 30 years making deliberate choices about what belongs in them. Photographs on the walls arranged with the non-symmetry of placement by meaning rather than balance, a school photo next to a fence line photograph next to something that looked like a wedding somewhere in the 70s, the colors saturated in the way of old film. On the kitchen windowsill, 3 small succulents in clay pots painted in mismatched colors in the clumsy, distinct way of a child's hand. The dining table was set for 8, which stopped me in the kitchen doorway. The hearing was 4 people plus me. The table was set for 8 because it had always been set for 8. Because this was a table that had fed 8 people every Sunday for 30 years, and someone, Harlan, working alone in this house every morning, was still setting it that way. I stood in that kitchen with someone else's coffee in my hand. I wrote, "Oh." They arrived in separate vehicles, which told me everything. Dallas came in a late model white pickup, King Ranch package, the badge that says, "I grew up in this world and have complicated feelings about having grown up in this world." His wife wasn't with him. I'd been told she wouldn't come, no explanation given, which is its own explanation. He was 40 years old and he had the look of a man who had been making the same argument at volume for 3 months without it moving anything, and the sleeplessness of that was visible in the specific way of someone who lies awake running numbers. He'd worn a button-down shirt, which on a working rancher means, "I need to be taken seriously today." He shook my hand with both of his, meaning, "I am nervous and I need you on my side." Nora Pruitt-Casas arrived 6 minutes after, in a Subaru with a child's crayon drawing taped to the back window, a horse, a sun, the blocky shape of a house that might have been this house, probably was this house. She was 37 and she had the specific exhaustion of someone who has been translating between 2 people who speak the same language but have stopped using it for each other. She hugged me before she shook my hand. I wrote, "Hugged first." Recalibrate. Earl Pruitt arrived with Harlan. Same truck. Earl walked 2 steps ahead. I noted this. Filed it. Earl was narrower than his brother, older by 5 years, with the same jaw architecture but without whatever it was underneath Harlan's jaw that kept it from reading is simply mean. He had the manner of a man who considered himself a truth-teller, which is one of the most exhausting things a person can be and still believe it's a compliment. He sat down across from Harlan. I had arranged the seating deliberately: mediation seating, interleaved, neutral, and Earl disregarded it entirely, planting himself next to Dallas, across from Harlan, as if he'd walked in with a side already chosen. He had. I watched Harlan notice this. He sat down in the chair at the head of the table, the one I'd specifically not designated as the head of the table, put his hat on the table in front of him, folded his hands, and looked at the window. Not at his children. Not at his brother. The window. "My name is Mei Chen. I'm a certified land use mediator with the Kerr County Extension Office. This hearing is voluntary, non-binding, and confidential. Nothing said here enters any public record unless all parties agree to a written resolution, which would then be forwarded to." I said what I always say. I said it the way I always say it. Harlan looked at the window. "Not everyone can live with this path," he said. First words he'd spoken in the house since we'd sat down. He said them to the window, informatively, the way you inform a room of a fact that has already happened. Dallas's exhale came through his nose. Not a sigh. Something more deliberate. A man managing his respiratory system before managing his words. Nora put her hand flat on the table. "Dad," she said. "I'm not here to argue," Harlan said. "I'm here because your lawyer said it would go worse if I wasn't. So I'm here. I'm listening." "That's all we're asking," Dallas said. Harlan looked at his son for the first time since we'd sat down. Not a long look. The kind of look you give a thing when you have already formed your opinion of it and are only verifying the opinion holds. "You asked for a good deal more than that," Harlan said. Dallas walked through the offer the way he'd rehearsed it, and I let him, because the rehearsal was keeping him anchored, and an unanchored Dallas in this particular room seemed like a weather event I didn't want to manage unprepared. Sunstate Holdings. 400 acres. The southern pasture, the creek corridor, the cedar break with no agricultural value and significant scenic value. Developers speak for, we will put vacation condominiums here and give them names that suggest heritage. $2.1 million. He'd brought printouts. He laid them on the table. He'd also brought a full breakdown of the ranch's current debt structure, which told me the argument had reached a level of financial desperation I'd underestimated. The feed store, Dallas said. Dallas, Nora said. She's going to look it up anyway. He meant me. The ranch has been carrying the store's debt for 4 years. Dad knows this. Your feed store, Harlan said. Your store. I didn't sign anything for that store. The room temperature adjusted itself. Dad, Nora said, that's not the point. The point, Dallas said, not to Nora, to his father, is that the south pasture runs nothing. Has run nothing for 3 years. The grass is gone, the water access is limited, the stock's been moved north. We're carrying insurance and property tax on 400 acres that produce zero. And there's a buyer offering $2 million for it. If we don't sell something, the bank is going to sell everything. Then, let them sell everything, Harlan said. The quiet in the room after that had physical weight and direction, like weather before it decides what form to take. You'd rather lose the whole ranch, Dallas said. Not a question. Then sell the part that matters, Harlan said. Yes. He picked up one of Dallas's printouts. He looked at it. He set it down with the careful precision of a man setting down a thing he finds genuinely offensive but is managing not to say so. Your mother, he said, and his voice did not change in the way voices change when approaching something tender. It stayed even and unremarkable, which was worse, planted cedar elms along the south fence line. She did it herself. Dug every post hole, dragged the saplings out of the truck bed. I told her they'd die in the drought. She didn't listen to me. They're 40 feet tall now. A pause. That's what you're asking me to sell. Dallas looked at the printouts in his hands. He set them down. The room held the silence of that sentence for a long time. I was aware of several things simultaneously: Earl's expression, which was reading as something complicated I didn't have time to decode, Nora's hand still flat on the table, and the window, through which, at the distant southern edge of the property, the tops of the cedar elm canopy caught the angled morning light and held it in the way of things that have been standing long enough to know how. Dad, Nora said. Those trees are part of the acreage in the offer. Dallas's voice had gone careful. Careful is not gentle, careful is controlled, and controlled hurts differently. I know. I thought about it. We can negotiate to keep the tree line, we can put an easement on it. An easement, Harlan said. A legal protection. I know what an easement is. He looked at Dallas and the look was not anger, not yet, not exactly. It was something I see sometimes in hearings between people who have run out of the language to explain what they need. You want to put a legal protection on your mother's trees, inside a development you sold to strangers. Dallas opened his mouth. Please don't, Nora said. She wasn't talking to Dallas. She was talking to her father. To the decision she could see him making. To the version of him that was about to close entirely and, finally, the way a window closes against weather, not violently, just definitively, with a click you can hear across a room. Harlan picked up his hat. He stood. He was, for just a moment, before he put his hat on and walked to the door, the sum total of everything this land had made of him, old and wide and rooted and absolutely, irreversibly alone in the decision he'd already made before he walked through the door that morning. He put on his hat. He walked out. The door closed quietly. That was the worst part. The hearing ended 40 minutes later, having produced nothing but an agreement to reconvene in 2 weeks. I drove the south fence line on my way out. My county truck rattled over the caliche track inside the property fence, past the dead grass and bare brush, and the cedar elms came up on my left like a wall, but not the hard kind, not the defensive kind. The elms rose straight and pale-trunked and close together, their canopy beginning about 15 feet up and spreading from there into something large enough that I had to crane my neck to see the top of it. Leaves small and dark green, barely moving in the dry October air. I stopped the truck. I got out and walked to the fence and put my hands on the wire. I am a mediator. I deal in what can be legally agreed upon, what can be signed and filed and sealed. I don't deal in what people planted in drought years on the theory that it might outlast them. I thought about a woman I had never met and never would, whose name was Ruth, who had stood on this side of this fence in a summer I wasn't in the county for and dug holes in hill country limestone and put saplings into them and believed, against the available evidence, that they would survive. They were 40 feet tall. The wind moved through the upper branches. A low continuous sound, like the inside of something large. Like breathing. Like something that had learned to breathe. I got back in my truck. I opened my notebook and tried to write something and couldn't. I drew a bluebell. It still looked like a sock. Part 2. The second hearing. I spent the 2 weeks between the first and second Pruitt sessions doing something I technically wasn't authorized to do, which was research. Proper land mediation doesn't require a mediator to investigate the parties. We receive what's in the file, we take what's said at the hearings, we ask clarifying questions. We are, by design and statute, neutral. We don't dig. We don't go looking for the parts of a situation that weren't offered. I dug. I justified this to myself in the ordinary way. I needed context. I needed the full financial picture. I needed to be prepared for whatever came through the door on November 12th. These justifications were technically accurate and emotionally dishonest in about equal measure, and I knew it, and I dug anyway. What I found in the Kerr County livestock auction records was a name I recognized and a pattern that made me put my pen down and sit with it for a moment before I wrote anything. Harlan G. Pruitt. 3 separate auction dates over the preceding 3 weeks. 22 head in the first sale. 19 in the second. 31 in the third. 72 head of cattle sold at auction over 21 days. The Pruitt herd, before the drought pushed the south pasture animals north, had run approximately 240 head. The remaining animals, running on the north pasture, numbered 160 by my last file estimate. After 3 weeks of quiet, undisclosed, apparently solitary auction attendance, Harlan Pruitt was running 88 head. He was selling his cattle to cover the ranch's debt service. Not telling anyone. I sat with this for a long time. I drew 3 successive attempts at a bluebell, all of them socks. Then, I drew a cow. The cow was recognizably a cow, which surprised me. I stared at it. I wrote, he chose the land over the herd. He is choosing the land over everything. He hasn't told his children. He will not tell them unless someone makes him. Then, Earl knows. I didn't have documentation for this. I had inference, built from the pattern of Earl's behavior at the first hearing, the seat choice, the angle of his attention, the specific quality of his silences, not the silences of someone uninformed but of someone managing what they know and when to deploy it. Earl was, in my professional assessment, a human IED with good intentions and catastrophically bad timing. November 12th was 10 days away. I didn't sleep particularly well. The morning of the second hearing, the gate was locked. I wrote this down, gate locked. 8:54 a.m. I sat in my truck on the outside of it for 4 minutes before I called Nora's cell. She came down the drive and opened it without comment. She looked like she'd been up since 4. She'd done her hair, which meant she was trying, which meant she was scared. How bad? I asked. She gave me a look that communicated a great deal in another context. In this context, I am not going to quantify it because quantifying it will make it real and I'm not ready for it to be entirely real yet. Dallas brought a lawyer, she said. I know. I have the paperwork. Not just, she stopped. Started again. It's Marcus Ali. I stopped walking. Marcus Ali was a real estate attorney out of San Antonio whose professional specialty was accelerated property partition actions, a legal mechanism that, in Texas, allows co-owners to compel a sale when parties cannot agree. It is, essentially, a legal crowbar. It requires a judge. It takes the decision out of the family's hands entirely. Dallas is threatening partition? I said. Nora looked toward the house. Dallas has been threatening partition for a week. Marcus Ali is what the threat looks like when it has a suit on. I wrote, partition threat. Ali. This just became a different hearing. The second session had a different architecture than the first, and the architecture was communicating everything before anyone opened their mouths. Dallas's attorney had arrived earlier than Dallas, earlier than anyone, which was a move, and he'd rearranged the chairs into a formal opposition configuration, both sides facing each other across the table's full width, a legal notepad at every place setting. He'd also moved the family photographs. Not far, just repositioned two of them slightly, to clear table space. I noted this because Harlan noticed it immediately when he walked in. A 3-second pause in the doorway. His gaze going to the wall and, then, to the table. Locating the photograph that had been moved. What the locating cost him, nothing visible. Which was everything. He sat down. Marcus Ali was 44, compact, with the particular presentation of an attorney who has decided that appearing unhurried is the most aggressive thing he can do. He smiled at Harlan. Harlan looked at the window. I want to start, I said, by reaffirming that this is a mediation and not a legal proceeding. Mr. Ali is here in an advisory capacity. Marcus Ali said pleasantly, I'd advise we get to the substance quickly. My client has a very clear position. Dallas looked at the table. He hadn't looked at his father since he'd sat down. Dallas, I said. Would you like to start? He nodded. He had updated financial projections, a third-party property valuation, a ranch debt amortization timeline. He walked through it methodically, and, I'll give him credit, he was holding himself together with visible effort and not letting the effort show. He was making the argument he'd come to make, the rational argument, the financially demonstrable argument. He was making it to me. Not to his father. He'd given up making it to his father, I realized. Somewhere in the 2 weeks between hearings, Dallas Pruitt had stopped believing the argument could reach Harlan and had started believing it only needed to reach a judge. That was what Marcus Ali represented. Not a threat. A decision. Dallas had already made the decision. When he finished, he looked at his father for the first time that morning. That's where we are, Dad. Harlan said nothing. If we don't resolve this here, Dallas said, with the forced evenness of a man controlling something that wants to move, I'm going to file for partition. I don't want to do that. I'm telling you I don't want to. But, I cannot, his voice caught, briefly, and he found it again. I have daughters in school. I have a store that is upside down. I have a bank that has been patient with me for 4 years and is done being patient. I need this resolved. Harlan looked at the window. I know you do, he said. The gentleness of it was, I think, worse than anger would have been. Then, why won't you help? Dallas said. Harlan didn't answer. You're going to lose everything trying to keep the part of it that's already gone. Mom is gone, Dad. Those trees they're not her. They're just trees. The room was very quiet. You don't have to tell me she's gone, Harlan said. Earl spoke after a silence that had the quality of something stretched. He had been present since the beginning, seated once again on Dallas's side of the table, doing the thing I'd watched him do since the first hearing, managing information, rolling it between his fingers mentally, deciding when to let it drop. He was not a malicious man. I want to be clear about this because the word malicious would make what he did more comprehensible and less sad. Earl Pruitt was a man who believed, genuinely, that hidden things caused more damage than known ones. He was correct about this as a general principle. He was incorrect about timing in nearly every specific application. Tell them about the cattle, Earl said. He said it to Harlan. Not loudly. Not accusingly. The way you say a thing you've been holding back so long that when you finally release it, the only available register is tired. Dallas looked at Earl. Harlan looked at his brother, and, for the first time in 2 sessions, something moved in his expression, not guilt, not exactly. The recognition of a door he'd planned to open on his own schedule that had just been opened without him. "What cattle?" Nora said. Harlan said nothing. "Dad." Nora's voice had changed. "What about the cattle?" I looked at my notes. At the auction records I'd printed and folded into the back of my file folder and not yet introduced, because I'd been waiting for the right moment and had apparently miscalculated it by approximately 3 minutes. "He's been selling them," Earl said. 3 weeks. I don't know the full count. Dallas looked at his father. "How many?" he said. Harlan looked at the window. 72 head, I said. Everyone looked at me. I placed the auction records on the table. I found them in the county livestock records during case research. Mr. Pruitt is within his full legal rights as a co-owner to manage and sell livestock. This is not an allegation of wrongdoing. I looked at Harlan. But it is something the other parties had a right to know, and I'm sorry it's coming up this way. Harlan looked at the records on the table. He looked at them the way a man looks at something he didn't intend to be seen. "You were selling the herd," Dallas said. "To cover the debt. To cover the short-term operating note. The one coming due in January. You were selling without telling us I was managing the ranch." His voice was even. That was the worst part, still, the evenness. "That's what I do." "You were managing our decision for us," Dallas said. "You decided alone, without talking to anyone, to liquidate the herd and cover the note and make it so the offer doesn't feel as urgent. You made it so you could keep saying no and it would look reasonable. It is reasonable. It's not sustainable." Dallas's voice broke on the word and he caught it and repaired it, and when it came back it was different, scraped clean of the control he'd been maintaining for 2 weeks and 2 sessions and apparently 4 years of financial attrition. 72 head. "Dad, you're down to under 90 animals. You cannot run a cattle operation on 90 head in this county. You know that I know how to run my ranch." It is not the word landed somewhere that hurt and he left it there. "Dad, that is the entire point of why we're sitting in this room." "Please don't," Nora said. She'd said it to Dallas this time. Dallas looked at his sister the way you look at someone whose hand is extended toward a thing that's already falling. Gratefully. Helplessly. Then, he turned back. "I need you to hear me," Dallas said to his father. "I need you to actually hear what I'm saying and not look at the window. I need you to look at me." Harlan looked at his son. "I'm looking," he said. "I have nothing left." Dallas said it without any particular inflection, which meant he'd gotten to the place past inflection, the place where things are said because they're true and not because they're meant to persuade. "I have borrowed against my house. I have borrowed against my daughter's futures. I have kept the store open by," he stopped, "by choices I'm not proud of. And I came to this table with a solution that hurts nobody. It's land that's running nothing. It's money that solves every problem. It's a number that lets all of us, breathe again." His voice was even and it was breaking and it was both at once, which is one of the most painful things a voice can do. "And you're selling your cattle in the dark instead. And you didn't tell me. You didn't ask me. Did you think about calling me? Once? Did you think about picking up the phone and saying I'm handling it, give me time?" Harlan's hands were flat on the table. "I handled it," he said. "That's not what I asked." The silence went on long enough that I wrote 2 words in my notebook, crossed them out, and wrote them again, "Don't smooth. Let it sit." "No," Harlan said. "I didn't call you." "Why not?" "Because you'd already made your decision when you called Sunstate. That was your answer. I gave you mine." Dallas nodded. The slow nod of someone who has been half knowing something for a long time and finds the confirmation worse than the suspicion. "Then, I'll file for partition," Dallas said. "I don't want to. I have told you I don't want to. But you've left me no choice, and I think you know that, and I think you've decided that's acceptable to you. Harlan said nothing. Has he? Nora said. Very quiet. She wasn't asking Dallas. Dad. Have you decided that's acceptable? Harlan looked at his daughter. What happened in his face then was something I could not have written accurately, and I tried. It was not indifference. Not hardness. It was the specific expression of a man who has looked at all available paths and found that every one of them costs something he can't afford, and has decided to pay the price he can least explain rather than the one he can, because explaining would mean saying out loud what he is actually protecting, and saying it out loud might break it. He was protecting something already gone. He was protecting the way she had been here. Please don't, Nora said again. Quiet. Please don't let him file. Please. Just talk to us. She stopped. Put both hands flat on the table. I planted those trees with her. I was 12 years old and I held the saplings while she dug the holes, and I remember every single one of them, and I am not asking you to forget her. I am asking you not to lose us trying to keep her. The room was absolutely still. Harlan looked at his daughter for a long time. Then, at his son. Then, at his brother. He picked up his hat. I need some air, he said. He walked out and closed the door behind him the same way he'd closed it 2 weeks ago, quietly. As if he'd decided even the closing of a door wasn't something you needed to make noise about. Dallas looked at his attorney. Marcus Ali gave a small nod. Dallas looked at his hands on the table. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at nothing in particular for a while, and I watched his expression do the thing expressions do when someone is deciding which version of a terrible thing they're willing to be. I'm filing Monday, he said. Dallas, Nora said. I love him. He said it to no one, or to the room, or to the air his father had just occupied. I love him, and he has made his choice, and I've made mine. That's all this is. He stood up. He thanked me. Formally, specifically, with both hands again, that nervous two-handed thank you, and it was such a small, human thing in the middle of all of it that I had to look at my notebook. He and Marcus Ali walked out. The room held me and Nora and Earl, who had the grace, finally, to look like a man who wished he'd timed something differently. Nora was still. Both hands flat on the table, looking at the space where her father and her brother had both been and were no longer. He's outside, I said. She didn't answer. Nora. Your father is outside. He's not gone. I know where he is, she said. I've known where he's been for 2 years. He's been in the same place since Mom died. He's been standing right next to her, and we've all been standing in a different place, and none of us, she stopped. Looked at the window. None of us could figure out how to close the distance. She walked to the window and stood there, looking at the south pasture, at the cedar elm canopy visible at the far edge of the property, catching light the way it always did in the morning. I wrote the distance. I circled it. I found Harlan outside by his truck. He was standing next to the driver's door, not in it, looking at the southern end of the property. Hat in hand. The first time I'd seen him not wearing it. I stood next to him at a respectful but genuine distance, close enough to be present, far enough to be optional. We stood there for a while. He'll file, Harlan said. He said he would. He will. Dallas doesn't bluff. No, I agreed. You knew about the cattle. I found them in the public records. I should have raised it before the hearing. I apologize. He shook his head. Wouldn't have mattered. Earl would have said it anyway. The wind was moving through the elms at the far end of the property. Breathing, like always. Mr. Pruitt, I said. If Dallas files for partition, a judge will likely order a sale of the shared property, the whole ranch, or a division if the land can be partitioned in kind. You won't control the process or the buyer. Sun State's offer, at least, includes negotiable terms. He looked at the elm canopy. "I know," he said. "And I'd still say no." I wrote nothing. There was nothing to write. "She planted them the year we lost our youngest," Harlan said. I did not write this down immediately. I waited. We had a third one. After Dallas, after Nora. She didn't make it to a year. He paused. Not for effect. Just because some sentences have to stop before they continue. Ruth didn't. She wasn't the kind of person who talked about things. She did things. She got up one morning about 6 months after and said she was going to plant something, and she went out with a shovel, and she didn't come back in until supper time. He looked at the elms. I don't know if she was thinking about the baby when she planted them. I never asked her. I should have asked her. He put his hat back on. But I know, he said, that when she planted them, she wasn't thinking about development rights or aerial acreage assessments or the judgment of a San Antonio court. She was just putting something in the ground that she wanted to stay. He got in his truck. He drove toward the barn. I stood in the drive for a while. The morning had gone warm. Behind me, through the open window of the house, I could hear Nora's voice and Earl's, low and unresolvable. I opened my notebook. I wrote a third one. Then, I closed it without drawing anything at all. Part 3. What stays? The partition filing was assigned to the 198th District Court of Kerr County on a Thursday in December, 7 weeks after Marcus Ali said Monday. I had, by that point, technically closed my involvement with the Pruitt case. The mediation had not produced a resolution. That was the outcome. I closed the file, logged the hours, submitted the report, and went home and stood in my kitchen for a while doing nothing particularly useful. It is a professional hazard of mediation that you don't get to know how things end. You are a component of a middle act. You provide the room and the table and the structure within which two things might move toward each other, and if they don't move, you document that too, and then you go home. The story continues without you. I kept the Pruitt file in a drawer I'd cleared out specifically for it. I kept reading the auction records. The partition case was complicated almost immediately by a development I had, technically, nothing to do with, except that I was the person who had filed the paperwork in November, during the 3 weeks between hearings, when I had been doing research I wasn't authorized to do. The paperwork was a nomination to the Kerr County Heritage Tree Registry, a voluntary county program protecting trees over 50 years old with documented ecological or cultural significance. The cedar elm row on the south fence line of the Pruitt property qualified on multiple criteria: age, established by growth ring estimation; species, a native Texas variety in active decline in the hill country due to drought and development pressure; and ecological function, as a riparian buffer for the creek corridor supporting several native bird species, including 2 on the state watch list. I had filed this nomination on my own time. It was, by any strict reading, outside my professional mandate. It was also, by the time the partition case reached the 198th District, sufficient grounds for the judge to issue a preservation hold pending a full ecological assessment of the nominated trees and creek corridor, which bought the case approximately 6 months of delay. Sunstate Holdings withdrew their purchase offer in February. They did not explain why publicly. I can infer they had timetables, other projects, other counties. They did not have 6 months to wait for a Texas district court to decide whether a row of cedar elms constituted heritage. The Pruitt Ranch remained, as of the withdrawal, owned jointly by Harlan Pruitt, Dallas Pruitt, and Nora Pruitt Casas. No sale had occurred. No partition had been ordered. Dallas sold Pruitt Ranch Supply in February. He got $322,000 for the business and inventory, which was less than the debt it carried and more than I think he expected. He moved his family to San Marcos. I know this because Nora told me, and Nora told me because we'd had coffee twice in January, which was outside my professional mandate, and I had gone both times. Dallas and Harlan had not spoken since November. Harlan had, in the interim, sold the remaining 88 head of his cattle. Nora called me on a Tuesday in May. I was in my truck between mediations, reviewing notes on a property line dispute that was boring in the relieving way that most of my cases are boring, solvable, manageable, not load-bearing. He had a cardiac event, she said. 3 weeks ago. He's fine, he's home, he's fine, the doctor says it was a warning. He's supposed to rest, which he is not doing, but he's trying. I'm glad he's okay, I said. He wants to see you. I put my coffee down. Nora, not for mediation. He knows what the case is. He has something he wants to give you. He asked me to call. She paused. He said, tell her she doesn't have to come. But, I'd like to give it to her myself. I sat with this for a moment. I'll come Saturday, I said. The hill country in May is what October wants to be when it grows up. I want to say this correctly. October on the Pruitt property had been beautiful in the cold, brittle way of something about to let go. May was different, everything had greened up in the reckless way of Texas spring, when the land takes the rain it gets and decides to spend it all at once, and the air smelled like cedar and something floral I couldn't name, and the grass in the north pasture, where there were now no cattle, had gone tall and unmowed and was moving in the wind with a kind of deliberate joy. The gate was unlocked. I stopped at it and looked at this for a moment. Then, I drove through. The house looked the same. Maybe cleaner, somehow, not because anything had been added but because May light is kinder than October light, more forgiving of surfaces. The front porch had a new chair on it, facing south, angled toward the elm canopy at the far property line. A wool blanket over the arm. A coffee cup on the railing. He was inside when I knocked. He came to the door in a gray work shirt without the sleeves rolled, which was the only concession to convalescence I'd see from him. No hat. He looked older than he had in November. Not worse. Just older. You came, he said. You asked, I said. He held the door. The kitchen table was set for 2. Not 8. 2. I noted this and put the note away because some things don't need to be processed out loud. He made coffee. He poured me a cup without asking how I took it, and I took it the way it came, black, and I didn't say anything about that. He sat down. He had a box on the table beside his coffee. A shoebox, old, the kind that's been used as storage so long the original shoe was a memory. The lid was on. I want to explain something first, he said. You don't have to, I want to. He folded his hands on the table. I know what everyone thinks about what I did. Dallas. Maybe Nora. You. I don't think you think I was obstinate. You think I held onto a piece of ground because I couldn't let go of the dead woman. He looked at me directly, which he hadn't done much in the previous hearings. His eyes were, and this surprised me, not the color I'd expected. Lighter. That's not wrong. But it's not all of it. He put his hand on the lid of the shoebox. Ruth kept a journal, he said. Not a diary, she wasn't a diary person. She was a naturalist. Self-taught. No credentials. She just paid attention to things. A pause. She kept records of everything on this property. Every bird she identified. Every plant. Every insect. The creek levels by season for 30 years. Every tree she planted, with the planting date and the location and the reason she chose that species. He paused again. She had a reason for everything. He lifted the lid. Inside was a journal. Bound in faded green cloth, the spine worn, the edges of the pages yellowed. Thick, more than one volume, I realized as he lifted it, 2 journals bound together with a strip of leather, tied in a knot, the kind of knot you tie when you're putting something together carefully rather than in haste. He set it on the table between us. There's an entry for the cedar elms, he said. Planting date, species selection, her rationale. Soil conditions. What she expected. What she hoped for. He looked at the journal. There are entries for every single living thing on this property that she found worth documenting. Which was, in Ruth's opinion, everything. I looked at the journal. I did not reach for it. She wrote about Emma, he said. I waited. That was the baby. Emma Ruth Pruitt. She lived 11 months and 22 days. He said the numbers the way you say numbers you've said 1,000 times and stopped being surprised by, a long time ago. Ruth planted the elms in Emma's first spring. She didn't say that in the journal, she never stated it directly. But, the entry is dated April 14th of that year, and the reason she gave for choosing cedar elms is long-lived, drought-resistant, native, quiet. Those were her words. He touched the cover. Quiet. I sat with this. It sat like something with actual mass. She chose the tree for a child she was about to lose, I said. She was already losing her, Harlan said. Emma was sick from the beginning. Ruth knew. She wanted to put something in the ground that would outlast what was happening inside the house. The morning was quiet. A cardinal outside. Whined through the screens. I want this on record, Harlan said. Not the family record. The county record. The formal record that says, this land was known and cared for, specifically and completely, by someone who paid attention to it for 35 years. I want that document to exist somewhere that can't be sold. He slid the journal toward me. I want you to file it. You do the heritage documentation. This belongs with that. I put my hands on the journal. The leather tie was still knotted. I didn't open it yet. Harlan. First time I'd used his first name. It surprised both of us. I need to tell you something. The Heritage Tree nomination, that's what held up the partition case. That's what gave Sunstate a reason to walk away. He looked at me. I know, he said. You know. Nora told me in February. He looked at his coffee cup. You weren't supposed to do that. No. Why did you? I thought about how to answer this honestly. The honest answer was, because I stood under those trees and heard them breathing and thought about a woman who planted saplings in a drought year for a child she was losing, and I couldn't file a closed without resolution report and drive away without doing one more thing that was within my actual power to do. It seemed like the right thing, I said. He looked at me for a long time. It was, he said. I spent 3 hours in my truck that afternoon. The county scanner had been broken for 2 weeks. I'd submitted the maintenance request 3 times, progressively, which meant I couldn't digitize the journal on site. I sat in my truck with the journal open on the passenger seat and photographed every page with my phone, page by page, in the May afternoon light, and I read as I photographed. Ruth Pruitt's handwriting was small and even, not ornate, not flourished, the handwriting of someone more interested in accuracy than impression. She used a fine-point pen in dark blue ink, and, alongside the written entry she had drawn everything. Every plant had a sketch. Every bird had field proportions noted beside it. The creek had a seasonal level diagram, 30 years of data stacked on a single page, each year labeled, the drought years visible as absences in the bars. The cedar elms had 3 sketches, one at planting, saplings, barely visible, small uncertain lines, one at 10 years, knee-high canopy, recognizable, one at 30, the full 40-foot canopy rendered in careful crosshatch, taking up the entire page. The entry for April 14th was 3 lines. Planted 17 cedar elm saplings along south fence, post positions marked last week. Species selected, long-lived, drought-resistant, native, quiet. I want them here after I'm not. That was all. I want them here after I'm not. I sat in my truck with the May light coming in sideways and this sentence in front of me, and I held it for a while the way you hold something you've been handed that's more than you expected. A woman I never met. A dry spring, 35 years ago, in the hill country of Texas. Her youngest child dying. She dug holes in limestone caliche and put trees in the ground and wrote 3 lines about why. Not for posterity. Not for the county record. Not for Sunstate Holdings or the 198th District Court or the Heritage Tree Registry or any of the legal and administrative infrastructure that had grown up around these trees in the 6 months since I arrived. For the simple and absolute reason that she wanted them to exist in this place after she was gone. I photographed the last page. I sat for a while. Then, I drew a cedar elm in my field journal. I drew it slowly, following Ruth's sketch on my phone screen, taking her proportions, her notation on the trunk division at 12 feet, the spread she'd measured, the crosshatch pattern she'd figured out for capturing light through the leaves. When I finished, I looked at it for a long time. It looked like a cedar elm. Nora arrived as I was walking back to the house to return the journal. She pulled up in the Subaru with the horse sunhouse drawing still on the back window, got out, and stopped when she saw the journal in my hands. "What is that?" she said. "Your mother's field journals," I said. Nora looked at the bound volumes for a long moment. "At the house." "At me." "He gave them to you?" "To file with the county. He wants a formal record." I held them out. "I've photographed every page. I have what I need for the registry." Nora didn't take them immediately. "He never showed us these," she said. "We didn't know they existed." "I know. He had them this whole time." "He had them this whole time," I said. She took the journals. She untied the leather strap with careful fingers and opened to a page near the middle, not the cedar elm page, not the Emma page, just a page, a sketch of a painted bunting with the date and the weather and the observation returned earlier than expected. Check nest site, same cedar, third branch from bottom. Same bird? Unknown, but probably. She stood in the driveway reading her mother's notation about a bird that came back to the same branch, probably in the May light, with her hand flat on the page. She stood there for a long time. I let her. Behind us, through the porch screen, I could hear Harlan moving in the kitchen. The sound of a chair. A coffee cup on a counter. The small sounds of a man living in a house alone who has decided, today, to go on living in it. Dallas was not there. Dallas was in San Marcos. I did not know when or whether he would come back, and I did not know whether Harlan had asked, and I did not know whether the asking had happened or was still somewhere in the future they were all navigating without a map. Some distances don't close on any particular afternoon. That's the thing they don't put in the mediation handbook. I drove out through the unlocked gate. I pulled onto the county road and stopped. Behind me, through the rearview mirror, the rise the house sat on, and, beyond it, just barely, at the far southern edge of the property, the top canopy of the cedar elm row, catching the May light the way it had caught the October light. The same trees. A different season. The same held quality of something that had decided to stay. I opened my field journal to the drawing I'd made that afternoon. The cedar elm. Proportions noted. Canopy spread. Trunk division at 12 feet. The crosshatch of light that Ruth had figured out how to draw and had taught me, accidentally, through a photograph on a phone screen, 35 years after she'd drawn the original. It looked like a cedar elm. I didn't write anything under it. There wasn't anything to write that the drawing didn't already say. And some things: a woman in a drought year with a shovel, a row of trees that chose to stay, a family still learning the distance between grief and the living. Some things need to be left without a footnote.